Hey everyone. Let's get started. Today we're going to talk about auctions. Uppboð in Icelandic. So this is another application that we're going to consider in terms of sort of game theoretic reasoning. And in particular, what we're going to ask ourselves is, if I'm participating in an auction, how do I bid strategically? And what type of auction design is amenable to what types of strategies? So it's kind of like there's two questions here. First of all, how do you behave as a bidder, as a player in this game? And the other one is, what do you do if you're the seller? How do you want to sell your product, and what type of auction mechanism is most suitable for your needs? Auctions, of course, are pretty commonplace. They may be a little bit more commonplace than you think. Of course, they've been used historically for all sorts of sales, like if you're selling bonds or if the US government is selling treasury bills, that's an auction. Leasing land for all sorts of purposes, or timber or oil, or if you want to privatize companies like Landssíminn, sell art online, this happens through an auction. But then there's the whole internet landscape. So, for instance, eBay has just sort of made auctions be one of these things that you're very used to, since it's this huge sort of auctioneer online. And then there's one that is kind of interesting, which I'll talk about a little bit more, which is the sponsored search and ads on the internet. That's actually a large auction going on. And there's very exciting research going on in this field, especially these days. So if you look at just the sponsored search part, so here's just a Google search query, and it's we're just looking at some query like ticket to New York, and we're asking ourselves, how do we actually create the sponsored links there on the right? And really what's going on is that you have here this website that has all these different advertisers that want to sort of display their ads. And you have all these users, and they're searching for queries. And how do you match these? And how do you display something? Like, who should get the slot? Why should you put this particular ad up right now? Is it because it's most likely to click, or do you get the most revenue? Turns out this is an auction thing here. It's called sponsored search. Same thing happens for any other query here. Why is this broken? So I can't move the blinds, but we'll have to make do. So yeah, for every single individual who goes online and searches on Google, you're really running an auction against all the different queries. And of course, you have a huge team that's dealing with the scalability challenges of this, because every single query costs a lot of effort to figure out what ad you should display and why. But it's worth it, because, for instance, Google alone is hailing in, I think, 98% of their revenue comes directly from their ads. And we're talking about, I think it's a $150 billion market. Like, if you compare that to airlines are a $20 billion market, so it's huge, 7 times bigger, right? So it's also because advertising is effective that this is interesting. So unlike most other formats of advertising, you can actually know who your users are. So for advertisers, this is particularly interesting. But it's also interesting for the users, because now you're not getting scammed with all these things that you're completely uninterested in. You might actually get something that you want, and that's something that gets displayed. Besides, when you're using a search engine, you are searching for something. So you're kind of in a mode where you might be interested in learning about a particular thing or a product or something like that. Mostly these auctions on sponsored search are pay-per-click, so that just displaying an ad doesn't cost the advertiser anything, and the Google doesn't get any revenue from that. It's not until you actually click it. So there's some burden on Google or Yahoo or these places to display relevant ads. And so we'll actually try to cover this a little bit later in the course if we have time, to deal with how you actually sell these ads. What is the auction sort of format, and why does it work the way it is? And there are some intricacies in there that we'll try to cover. So so I already mentioned this thing here. The reason why game theory enters the play here is because when you are talking about a website like Google for displaying ads, really the advertisers themselves, the ones that are displaying these little text messages, they're kind of like agents, and they're being selfish. They're just interested in sort of gaming the system. They're trying to manipulate it in any way they want. They just want their ad to be displayed, and they want to pay the minimum amount for it, type of thing. So we kind of have to be aware of all these different sort of. We need to make sure that the mechanism that they're using is somehow not amenable to manipulation. And in order to be able to do that, we need to be principled in the way we deal with it. And dealing with advertising software is kind of complex, and so it's hard to just make an experiment and see if a particular type of ad format works or not. You have to sort of do it online. And so that's when doing it kind of grounds up from theory is a very interesting way to solve the problem, and that's what actually has happened here. So the big giants like Yahoo, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, eBay, they all hire tons and tons and tons of sort of computer science, economics people, like people that are interested in both, to work on this. This is like, I think, a quarter of the people working at Yahoo are, in fact, very famous economists or people working with the sponsored search program. And they're doing all sorts of very cool stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of the basics of auction theory here. So just to set the settings here, just to explain what we are dealing with here. So let's imagine that we have some one item and we just want to sell it. There's an apple. Okay. If I just knew what the apple would be priced normally and you knew it as well, probably I'll just sell you at that price. But that may not always be true. In fact, we may not know what it's sort of generally worth. Like we just have our own sort of value for how much it sort of cost us to make it or something like that. And we don't know how much benefit it's giving to anyone else. Like you may draw amazing payoff from simply eating an apple, and that will be worth more to you. So we'll later extend this to dealing with multiple items, and it becomes very interesting doing that because it's a little bit complex. But we do get some nice results from that. In general, we're just going to assume that we're just trying to get rid of the item, that in fact we made it, and even if we have to sell it at 1 cent or something like that, it's okay. But you could set a reserve price, meaning that like you have an auction and you won't sell it unless you at least make a bid of, I don't know, $50 or something for this apple. And anything else, there's just the item is still going to be there. So we'll sort of omit that, but it's kind of something that we can do to generalize it. So we now have tons of players, and they're called bidders. And they have, each of them, an intrinsic value of this item. They kind of know how much benefit they're getting from getting this apple. Like you may want the apple for $2. You may value this apple at $2.50, and you may want to type of resell the apple, and so you want to make profit off of that. You could have all sorts of different strategies for why you want that particular apple, and it's something that you just know by yourself. So this is the value that like the maximum value that you're willing to pay for it. So if it turns to like $2.01, you absolutely don't want it. You just want it at $2. That's like the absolute maximum you're willing to pay for it. So we're not aware of what anyone else is doing. In fact, these things are independent. So this assumption is something that is sometimes not true. Like it could be that there's just something gets created and there's kind of a knowledge of how good it is, like when you're dealing with, I don't know, buying soccer players for your league or something like that. You may have a kind of an expectation of how well he's doing and everybody else does, and so everybody has kind of a common value. And if you have a common value, well, you need kind of a different type of auction format. We won't really discuss that much. So we don't know these values, and we have to somehow be able to figure them out, and that's where an auction comes in handy here. And we're going to be using some of the game theory assumptions here about strategies and payoffs and so forth. But we need to change a little bit here because now we're unaware of payoffs of others. So when I, as a player in this game, am reasoning about my strategies, I can't simply look up in this matrix and see like, aha, this guy gets that much benefit from the apple. I'm going to lower my bid or something. We're unaware of it. It turns out that we can do that very easily. So the question is, I want to sell this. What do I do? Like, what type of an auction would you guys think of for this particular item here? I'm selling something like an apple. I know how much it sort of cost me to produce it. Each of you knows how much it's worth to you. What do we do? Can you name me some auction format? minimum bid. So how does that work? Okay, so I'm gonna say like, is anybody willing to buy it for something low or something high? Okay, so we just start with, I don't know, 50 cents. Who wants 50 cents? And if there are many of you still playing, like if there are 3 of you that are okay with that, I'm gonna raise it, say $1, and I'm just gonna keep going until maybe there's one person left, right? So that's one idea. And one other idea would be to say $100, anyone? And just like silence, probably. $80, $60, and I'm gonna just drop it down. And the first time somebody's willing to pay the price, I'm gonna sell it to you. Okay. So those are 2 different ways in which I could sell it, and we'll discuss both of them. And we're gonna do 2 more than that. What? Plasma-Desprez? Well, it's actually called the Dutch format. It's used for flowers. It's very interesting. So, but just for something, this little apple here, we could just imagine first that, let's say, if we simplify it a little bit and we actually knew the values of the bidders, like we talked about before, we could just sell it, right? We didn't really need an auction. So if I know that I spent X dollars or something creating it, or my value of this as a seller is X, I don't really want to sell it below X, but I'm willing to sell it at something higher than X. And there's a potential buyer here that has a value of Y, and hopefully Y is greater than X here. Then what will happen here is that I'm going to be probably able to sell it at some value higher than X. So if I ask you like this, you value it at $10, this apple, I value it at 5. What will I get? Like if I create the mechanism, how much money will I get from this? Will I get $5 or will I get $10 from doing that? Well, okay, let's change the number so that they don't add up here. Okay, let's say that you value it at 20 and I value it at 15. Do I get $15 to compensate for my cost for it? Or do I get $20, meaning $15 that I paid for it plus the $5 surplus? Like, what will be the price you end up paying? Like, what will be fair? You're probably going to charge them that value, right? As a seller, you now have all the power. If you are able to commit to a particular mechanism, you just get all the surplus. Surplus are just meaning how much extra I get, like the difference between our values, which is a positive quantity, if I'm willing to sell it, right? So if I decide on the mechanism, I get most of the surplus. So I can say, like, I am only willing to sell it at the value I know you're willing to pay for it, or maybe a little bit less, and I get all the extras. If you were able to, however, deal with the mechanism, and you knew that I spent $5 creating it, if you had all the power as a buyer, you would probably buy it at around $5, maybe a little bit more. And so I would get almost none of the surplus. So this surplus, the difference between how we value this different, or this particular item that is being sold, kind of gets divided between us. And it sort of depends on who is designing the mechanism. So being able to commit to the fact that we're going to do a particular type of an auction and we're not going to cheat, that is actually a big say in terms of this power dynamic. So so the fact that, for instance, you go online on eBay and you sort of auction and you put in your price or something like that, and then eBay isn't going to go back and say just like, well, I'm going to change my mind. I'm actually going to sell it to you at a higher price that I noticed that you're willing to pay for it in, I don't know, in a different auction or something like that. They're not going to do that. The fact that you know what the format is makes you trust the procedure, right? So you could also, I mean, if you couldn't decide or there was some, like for instance, if you're, I don't know, roaming around Egypt trying to buy something, probably you're not going to be able to commit to some nice sort of auction mechanism for whatever gizmo or whatever thing is being sold to you. You're probably going to resort to some sort of bargaining, and that's the topic of chapter 12, which we won't cover in the course. But it's kind of the surplus gets divided between the buyer and the seller. Okay, but this was a sort of thought exercise if you actually knew how much we were valuing it. And if we don't, then we need to resort to an auction, right? So we could ask people how much are they willing to pay. What would you say for an apple? Would you say how much is worth to you? Probably you wouldn't, right? You'd probably lie, try to manipulate the outcome, right? It's kind of a better strategy somehow to sort of underbid a little bit because you know I'm going to pick the highest, and you just want to get the highest a little bit lower, right? So we really want to be able to create an auction such that we're motivating the buyers to actually tell us the true value. We want you to tell us how much you actually wanted, and that's supposed to be the best thing for you as well. That should be your dominant strategy in the game theory lingo. Okay? So this is called auction theory, and it's a subfield of something called mechanism design. Mechanism design is kind of this economics term for essentially dealing with the world, trying to make sure that, for instance, the market works or something like that, or trying to make the rules such that people are in fact trying to compete for the right strategies that do something right, right? If you have, for instance, like disallowing monopolies is an example of a mechanism design, right? If we allow monopolies, then we won't have the whole competition going on and prices won't go down. You just have this kind of really powerful entity that just gets more and more powerful. So that's an example of that. So auction design would be a subfield of this type of general mechanism design, which is kind of the heart of economics. So it's kind of you design the market, you're being an engineer, sort of economical engineer. So in particular, what we want to do here is that we want to design an auction such that in equilibrium, in a Nash equilibrium, we're getting the results that we want. We want it to be true that nobody has an incentive to deviate from what they did, right? It should be that you're telling the truth and that you didn't want to do anything else. Same thing for the seller, right? So the goals, like where we're trying to go with all of this, could be any of the following. It could be I want to just maximize my revenue. This is probably what Google is optimizing. It could be doing something a little bit different, which is called maximizing social welfare or the efficiency, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. It's really that I want to sell the item to somebody who really wants it the most. Not necessarily the person who had the highest bid, but the person who has the highest value, right? Notice that if I know your true value, then like if it's a truthful mechanism, if it's the case that you always want to just bid whatever it's worth to you, then this sort of automatically comes out, right? It's kind of easy to optimize for this. But sometimes it's not as easy. And then you could have different functions here. You could be optimizing for fairness. You want to make sure that people who don't have get something a little bit better. There could be all sorts of functions here. But for now, we're going to look at social welfare, like the efficiency of the system. So we really just want to give it to somebody with the highest intrinsic value that we don't know. Okay? So let me talk about these different auctions. So the ones that we just mentioned, where we started sort of slowly raising the price, like 50 cents, $1, $1.50. It's called an English auction. And this is Sotheby's, they're selling art. So it's probably the type of auction you've seen in movies and so forth. So really the way it works, like for instance, here's how you can see it on eBay. Like on eBay, somebody's selling some crap here, or like X-Men at $41.55, and you can enter like a bid that's at least $1 higher, right? It's an example of an English bid here. In general, like the auctions on eBay are a little bit different, and we'll get to that. There's many different variants. So the rules of the game are the following. So there's like, at every round, the auctioneer is like announcing a price. First, like, who wants to just, how many people are willing to be in the auction, right? P equals to 0. Like, who is willing to pay nothing for it? Probably everyone. And then, if you raise your hand, you're agreeing to buy this item for that price plus $1. Okay? Or any increment. It could be any increment. So you just, people keep raising the price. So here's like Teletubbies. First, the price is 0. One guy raises his hand here, and he's essentially bidding 1, so now the price has reached 1. Somebody else raises his hand, the bid is now 2, and then 3, and then like after some time period or something like that, nobody else raises their hand, and it's sold at that price. Okay, it's called the English auction. So notice that the price that gets sold is the last offer of the person who actually ends up getting it. Okay. A Dutch auction, like for the flower market, here's some tulips and stuff being sold in Holland, is the other one that we mentioned here. And you can also do that on eBay. Here's, I don't even know what this is, but it's being sold for a Dutch auction. So there's a current price here, but you can make it an offer. So there's like a an offer thing going on here. So you could in fact say, well, how about like 120 or 100, something like that, and kind of keeps decreasing. So at the beginning, we were just saying some maximum price that we're willing to get from it, probably an absurdly high one, and we're just going to lower it by say $1, something like that in every period. Finally, somebody's going to raise their hand, and that's the person who gets it. And 99, 98, 97, this guy here raises his hand and he sells it. And again, the person who actually ended up raising his hand is paying the same price as was listed there. So you pay that one. Okay, and here are some interesting tidbits about this one here. This one is really quick, usually. It proceeds much quicker than the English auction because you can start at the value that's slightly higher than what you expect to get for it, and then you can work yourself down to it. And as soon as somebody said something, it's fine, right? So you can go pretty quickly. But usually only one bid here. And the U.S. Department of Treasury, that's how they sell bonds. They actually have a descending auction going on like that. And when they were, when Google was going public, they were selling stock and so forth, and then did that, for instance, using a variant of this. So of course they have all these economics people working on all these different types of auctions, and they ended up using that one. So it's kind of interesting to see why, because there are ones that are a little bit different. So here are two more that you might imagine. Let's imagine that instead of us just publicly announcing something, we actually just write it down on a piece of paper, what we want to buy, right? So if I have this apple, each of you writes down how much you're willing to pay for it, and you send it to me. What would you write? Would you write your true value? Why not? What would you write something probably lower than, or why would you write something lower? Right, exactly. Let's say there are only 2 people in the audience. Exactly, you get a higher surplus. You get a higher fraction of the surplus. But if there's tons and tons and tons of people at this auction, would your strategy change? Would you bid lower, higher? Same? You'd bid your true value. That's true, but I mean your surplus, which is probably what you wanted to get out of it, like you're getting exactly what you paid for, type of thing. It's kind of like you're getting 0 for it, right? I mean, if you were paying a little bit more, you'd be kind of a little bit unhappy, right? So you probably want to stay sort of on the happy side, meaning that you paid a little bit less than what you actually valued at, meaning that you have some resale value or something like that, right? But yeah, if you're an honest soul, it's all good. One item. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, if there's 5,000 people bidding on it, obviously, probably you want to be very close to your value, right? So we'll actually get to that. So that's one thing, and then there's a second one called Vickrey auction. This is a really interesting one. Anyway, so the ones I just mentioned is that everybody just writes down what they value the item at, or some bid. Doesn't have to be what they value it at, actually. And just the highest one is picked out, and that one is the person who gets the bid. Okay, it gets the item, and you pay the highest price. Okay, and you don't see anything of the other bidders. That makes it a little bit different from the first, like the ascending auction, in the sense that you're now not seeing everybody else, and you're saying, "Oh, this is a very popular item. I should probably stay in," or something like that, right? There's no herding effect here. A what auction? Silent. It's called the sealed auction. A silent auction. I mean, it's probably relatively quiet. Okay. You've heard that one? I haven't heard that one, but I could imagine. It's usually called a sealed auction. Anyway, so yeah, here one of these Tinky Winkies actually gets the apple. Okay, and then there's the really cool one here. So there's a second prize auction. So now what we're going to do is that each of us is going to write down what we, like our bid for the item. And the seller is not going to collect all the bids, and he's going to open the envelopes. And he's going to look at the highest value he saw and the second highest. And he's going to give the apple to the guy who had the highest bid, but he's going to charge him only the second highest value. Why would he do that? So here's an example. Like everybody sends it in. It sold at 5. Why is that? Well, it's because somebody here had that bid of 8, but he ended up selling it at 5. Exactly, he could have. Should he have? What if somebody had in fact written 9 million? Ah. But if everybody writes high numbers, well, you kind of get screwed, right? Actually, this auction form is really cool. We're going to talk a lot more about it. It's called a Vickrey auction. So this is Vickrey here. He's well, this was him in 1961. Guess he was kind of old by then, but he got a Nobel Prize for this idea in '96, and he died just a little bit before the ceremony. So he got kind of a memorial prize. And he actually also contributed to a mechanism we'll talk about a little bit later. But the really cool thing about this is that, well, we'll get to the really cool thing about Vickrey. I'm going to just keep it here in the pocket. So let's look at these 4 auctions that we talked about. We have this English auction, the Dutch auction, we have a first prize auction, second prize auction. How are they related, right? Are they all doing different things? Is your strategy the same or different for any of them? I mean, yeah, there are 4 different variants. There's a good question, like what is your revenue going to be? Well, let's look at it. So let's look at the English auction. Sorry, let's look at first at the first price auction. So it's just when you write stuff down in like a sealed envelope, and just the highest one gets it at that price. And we're going to look at that and compare it to the Dutch auction. Okay. So when you're looking at the strategy in the first price one, well, given that nobody else has a higher bid here, how much am I willing to pay, right? And for the same thing for the Dutch, well, given that nobody has raised their hand already because the price keeps going down, when should I raise mine, right? You don't really know because you have no information about what anybody else is doing. You kind of just have to sort of assess the situation, right? It turns out that these 2 auctions here are equivalent, strategically equivalent. In other words, you would be doing exactly the same thing here for both of these auctions. It doesn't matter if you're continuously lowering the price versus writing it down in envelopes and you take the highest price. It's kind of interesting to think about. And same thing can in fact be said for the second price auctions here. They're equivalent to the English auctions. So given that bidders bid truthfully, the auctions are the outcomes in the auctions are the same. So let's think about that a little bit here. So you have when you're staying in an English auction and things like prices keep increasing, you're getting a little bit of information about what everybody else is thinking, right? You kind of know who is staying in. And let's say that you're now there's like there've been all these people and now there's just 2 people left. There's just you and another guy who's staying in and really desperately fighting for, like, I don't know, that juice box, okay? And there's at some point one of you is going to sort of stop, right? And let's say that the price is reached, like you're paying $5,000 for this juice box, and then you raised your bid to 5,010, and the other guy sort of like stopped. Okay, really, maybe you're valuing that juice box at 6,000, but you're probably only going to end up paying what that other guy stopped at, right? In fact, you end up paying where he stopped. You end up paying the second highest price, approximately, right? Plus maybe 1 increment. So you're kind of doing exactly the same thing as happens in the second price auction. So it's kind of not that unintuitive that you might end up having an auction, a sealed price auction, where you take the highest guy and you make him pay the second highest bid. So it's actually strategically equivalent. And we'll actually see that the strategy here is to be truthful. So that's the next question here, to be truthful here. So in order to be able to figure out to be able to say something about truthfulness here, we need to just define a little bit what's going on here. So you have these n people, and they're trying to bid for some item, and they all have this value that we've been talking about, like how much is it worth to you. We're going to call that VI for some guy I here. It's like how much you're willing to pay. Like you're not willing to pay a cent more, but any value up to VI. So it's only known to you, and we kind of want to create a mechanism or a design here such that playing VI, that in fact you writing a bid that is truly your value is somehow the best thing you should do. Okay? Okay, so in general, like if a bidder I wins, he ends up paying some price. The utility, like the happiness that he gets from it, is VI minus PY. What does this mean? It just means that if I have an item here, I value it at 6,000, and I paid 5,000 for it. This is my juice box, right? My utility from this transaction here is now $1,000. Like in fact, I got the item, and I got this 1,000 surplus, which I would have been willing to spend because I value this thing at 6,000, and I got it for 5, right? So it's kind of like this positive quantity here usually. If it's not positive, then why did I buy it, right? I really didn't want this $20,000 car, and I bought it. It kind of sucks, right? So it's negative utility. And if I really value this apple at $8, you really want this apple, and you paid $8 for it, like you don't get any extra utility for it. You just get that apple, right? If you had paid a little bit more for it, you'd give up, right? It's kind of like when you're in like the cinema, you're like, oh, popcorn for $800 or 800 kroner or something like that, right? But you really want that popcorn. You're willing to sort of chip it out, but you don't get any sort of extra benefit like, ooh, popcorn was only 20 kroner type of thing, right? So anyway, so if you lose the actual auction, you don't get any utility. Like you're kind of indifferent. So of course, bidders prefer losing than paying more for the value. So if you're overpaying that popcorn, probably you should just not get it. So it's clear that this utility thing here needs to be positive. So that's kind of our model here. So let's look at an auction here. So these people here, or I don't know if you should call them people or whatever they are, they have some intrinsic value, how much they value, I don't know, the apple or the car or something like that. And they're going to produce some bid. That's what they're going to bid for, okay? And there's some guy here, an auctioneer, and he determines the winner and he makes payments, okay? So the question is, how do I bid given my value? What is my strategy? And there could be an example here, like I could be a really honest soul, like you were being before. You just want to bid what it's worth to you. Like, I really want to pay $8 for this apple. I just really want that apple, right? So you're just gonna, your bid for something that has this value is just gonna be that value, right? You're just gonna be completely honest. Or you could be something, I don't know, like, was it Helena who was gonna pay maybe half of what it was, or just a little bit less, right? You're like, I'll put $4 for that apple, right? You're gonna try it. So that's an example of a different strategy. Notice that we're looking here at a function. We're really saying that whatever the true value is, here's how I'm gonna take that value. I'm gonna change it into something that I'm gonna bid. So if it were to cost, like, if it's really worth $10 to me, I'm gonna bid 5. If it's worth 12, I'm gonna bid 6, right? And I could even have, like, there's n players in the system. I know there's like 5,000 people bidding for that one item. I'm going to factor that in. I'm going to say, aha, I'm just going to bid 1/5,000th of what I value it at, or something like that. Or you could go absolutely bananas as a computer scientist and say, like, well, if something, blah, 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 then that, otherwise that. It could be like a really complicated function. It could be like an entire C procedure or something like that. But it's still a strategy. It still determines that for every intrinsic value that you might have, there's a bit that you can produce, okay? It's kind of a model of you in some sense. So you can in fact look at this as a game theoretic thing, where you just have now a big matrix where you have all the different strategies you could choose. And you say like, oh, how about the strategy where I'm being truthful, or the strategy where I'm doing this crazy stuff here in number 4. And you can try to see what is my payoff from each of these strategies, just like we were doing 2 days ago. And these become sort of pure strategies. We're not going to look at sort of randomized, like I'm either going to pick being truthful or I'm going to lie a little bit. Like it gets a little bit convoluted that way. We're just going to say that there's strategies like these functions and that they sort of comprise this matrix, okay? So it would look something like this. You would have, here's the first strategy of just being truthful. Here's always saying half of what you really mean. And then 1/5,000th or something like that. So it's kind of an example here of a game now with an incomplete information, because when I am a player and I'm reasoning about what's going on, I just know about what I would say, like what my function is. I don't really know what anybody else does, and I'm kind of trying to reason about it. So really, what we're looking for here then, game theoretically, is an equilibrium sort of similar to the Nash equilibrium, meaning that I want to find some strategies, and I'm going to call them here B1, B2, like for all the different players, I want a strategy such that nobody is going to want to change their strategy no matter what. Like they don't even have to know what the other guys are doing. They're just going to be happy doing what they're doing. Okay, it's going to be like the dominant strategy, just like you remember confessing is dominant in A Prisoner's Dilemma. Even though it's a worse outcome, you're okay always being always confessing, right? You recall this, I think. So a Nash equilibrium is when every strategy for every player is really the best response to all the other strategies. It means that nobody wants to deviate from the current outcome. Like, given what we're doing, we're kind of, I don't know, stuck because we can't improve anything just by changing by ourselves. So yeah, again, strategy here is a function, plan for the game, it's not just a bit. Okay, so now let's look at what I wanted to say here. Like, paying the second highest price is in fact forcing you to tell the truth. That your best strategy for this game, also then in English auctions, because they're equivalent, we proved that, is in fact to write exactly what you mean. You want to just write down $8 for this apple. If you win, you're probably not going to even pay $8. You might pay up to $8, but it depends on the other people, right? Could be that the next highest person wrote $4 because, I don't know, for some reason. And that's what you should do. And we're gonna prove that in fact this is the best strategy in the game. Did you have a question? Okay, so in other words, what we're really trying to prove here is to say, I don't benefit from lying if I do this. Like the auction is set up in such a way that I'm not really benefiting from telling anything but the truth. So in other words, like it's very easy for me to just make a bid because I don't have to reason about what would other people do and how is it going to be, how many people are playing and all that stuff. It becomes really simple for us just to say, just to squirt out the truth, right? So yeah, the conclusion from, like if this theorem is true, we're going to show that it's actually true, then what this means is that doing the sort of second price auctions is an efficient thing to do. It gives the item to the person who has the highest value for it. Because we know what the value is, because you told us, right? So it's kind of interesting that this is, that these auctions exist. So yeah. Right. Right. So the comment was that there probably have been cases where you would be playing this type of auction, but there's still somebody who's like, aha, I want to just put a really high number here because I think nobody else is going to do it, and I'll win, and I'll just pay the second highest price, right? Okay. It may not be a very smart idea, but the fact is that we're assuming here that when you commit to writing a number on a paper, you just have a credit card authorization that has that number on it. You're gonna, if you write down $1 million, you may end up paying $1 million. Like you need to be prepared for that. So that's the essence here. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to be like, oh, I'm just joking type of thing, right? It's not a part of the auction. And in fact, if you write something that's too high, we're gonna show in this proof that you make it completely screwed in terms of what you want it, right? You're valuing this thing at something much lower, probably, right? So why would you pay higher than you let? Just to win? Well, you may end up paying for it, right? Okay, so let's just look at the proof here. So we're going to just show that telling the truth is in fact the best thing you should do. So if we have any other bid here that is not our true value, which we call here V1, because we're bidder 1 here, then we're in fact not doing so well. So we just look at what happens here if I have, if I'm V1 here, and there's some other bid from some other player here, less than us, okay? So I'm gonna win now, because I had the highest intrinsic value, and I if I bid this value v1, then b1 is the second highest value. The utility for actually in this scenario here is the difference, meaning I wrote down v1, which is my true value. I am paying something less, so I must be getting something for it. In fact, I'm getting a surplus of the difference here, right? Okay, so let's say, why would I bid above the second highest, assuming I knew the second highest? Well, probably there's no reason for me to, right? I wouldn't benefit from lying about it. And if I bid less than B2, I would in fact not get the item at all, because now I wouldn't be the highest, right? So I again have no gain from lying here, right? I go from positive utility to 0 because I didn't get the item, okay? So there's really two cases here. There's just, I win the item, and I'm essentially getting like a big surplus simply by not having to pay the full price, like my full value. I get the second highest, and I really have no incentive to deviate from that in either direction. Okay, so let's say that I lose when I'm playing v1. Okay, am I still going to say the truth? Well, let's say that now b2 is the second highest bid. Okay. Well, b2 has well, I mean, both of us have utility 0. So if I bid below 0, sorry, if I bid below B2, I will again get 0 utility because I again lost. And if I bid above B2, what will I get? Well, I would be overbidding what my value was, right? Because V1 is my value. And if I'm bidding too high, like you were suggesting, like this $1 million type of thing, well, I could get screwed because somebody else might have you might have somebody who has a really high second highest bid, and now you're paying much more for the product than you really wanted, much higher than your current value, right? So again, you don't really benefit from lying. Your utility from this transaction is massively negative. You're in debt, your life sucks, all sorts of things. Okay? So in other words, like it's kind of a really simple and elegant thing that's going on is that you don't want to bid higher and you don't want to bid lower because you won't benefit either way. So really you just want to say the proof. So mathematicians write this little box, like a proof complete, like QED is what it means. Okay, so let's look now at what this means. So because we're telling the truth in this type of auctions, the second price auctions and in the English auctions here, we can conclude that it's efficient here. So we're giving the item to somebody who has the highest intrinsic value. So it's optimizing what we call the efficiency, social welfare here. And we were able to do this without making any assumptions about the values or about what the item is or anything like that. We're in fact only saying, just by having this auction format that people are, I don't know, either ascending like the bids and adding $1 or something like that, or simply by writing down the stuff in sealed envelopes and then selling it to the person with the highest bid and giving him at the second highest. That just by doing it that way, you just get the truth out of it, and then you're giving to the person that has the highest value. It's kind of cool that it just works. And we didn't need to make any really mathematical assumptions here. So yeah, pretty much what we saw so far is that you have second price and English auctions, and they're the same, they're equivalent. They're in some sense, the English auction is like an active version of the second price auction. So we can in fact simulate one using the other. That's how you show equivalence sort of formally. And that the best thing to do, the dominant strategy here, is to tell the truth. And that this gives you that in equilibrium, in the Nash equilibrium here, if everybody doesn't want to change their strategies, you're getting the best outcome. You're getting efficiency. You're getting that the person with the highest values are in fact getting the item. But if you look at the first price in Dutch auctions, well, we showed already that they are also the same. That if you decrease the price, or if you just write down stuff on sheets of paper and you sell it to the person with the highest bid at the price, well, they're the same, but we don't know anything yet about if they're truthful or efficient. So let's just take a look here. Are they truthful? we kind of asked this question before, and everybody was like, no, I'm not going to tell my true value. I'm going to try to underbid, right? I'm speculating about what everybody else is doing, right? So it's here's two creatures here, and if somebody says 30 and then stops being in the sort of stops being in the game. Sorry, if yeah, what's the best way to look at this particular here? So first price auction here. If I write down on a sheet of paper my true value of 100 and true value of a 30, and I have some idea about that, probably I'm not going to write the true value. I'm going to write something less. In fact, if there are only 2 players here, I'm probably going to write like half of what I really mean, just to sort of be on the safe side, right? So in fact, it's not truthful. It's very far from truthful. It's your best strategy is to lie. And there's actually no dominant strategy. There's no strategy that can in fact be the best thing you should do in first price auctions. It's kind of interesting. So the question is, how do people actually behave? And we can try to read into it a little bit. So they're trying to assess and put some sort of beliefs on what they think everybody else is going to do. And there's a framework, mathematical framework called Bayesian analysis that allows you to reason about this thing. That if you have incomplete information and you don't know everything about what the world looks like, but you have some beliefs associated with it, like when you're predicting weather or something like that, you're pretty certain that this type of thing is going to happen here, and then you have another thing, you have all these probabilities. You can actually do some inferences here. You can actually use Bayesian analysis for amazing things. It's kind of cool. It comes from Bayes' theorem, probability, and there will be some more discussion about that later. Okay, so it's really that using Bayes, and you can actually sort of infuse it with game theory. Game theory seems to have sort of been infused with many different fields in the past, and one of them is this kind of incomplete information. And we formally, like for auctions, we say that if you have a set of bidding strategies, then you are at sort of a Nash equilibrium or a Bayes Nash equilibrium. If each player's strategy maximizes the expected payoff, given the strategies of others, right? So we're just defining a Nash equilibrium here, but we can, I'm kind of modifying it as we go. So in other words, because I don't know what the other bidders are in fact valuing the item at, I don't know your intrinsic values, I have incomplete information, so I can't really just say something about the values of everybody else. I have to sort of think about what do I expect your value to be. Okay, so it's just I'm expecting some particular payoff from you, and now I'm trying to make. So for instance, like when you were saying before, I'm not going to bid the full value. I'm going to bid something slightly less. It's because you're thinking everybody else is going to probably do something similar to that, and they're probably valuing it at something similar to me. Blah blah blah. Right. So it's really how we deal with it. And in fact, I'm going to show you now for a 2-player game with a little bit of sort of math notation that you're in fact always going to lie, and exactly how you're going to lie too. So here's just a brief reminder from stats and probability that you've probably seen before. So we can have a random variable that takes values between 0 and t. It's called v. And you remember that if you have like a function, like a probability function, you can also have its cumulative distribution function. It's really just a function that takes in a value like x or something like that. It says, what's the probability that the function is between 0 and x, right? It's really just a sort of the accumulated probability up to that point, right? Okay, so that's just the CDF. And then we also have a density function here, which is really just taking the CDF and we're differentiating it. It's really just called the probability distribution function. It's just a formal way to define it here. It's just that probability of x is that, probability of x plus 1 is that. It's just knowing what's the probability of things happening here, okay? So given this, I can define the expectation for a continuous variable. So you recall that when we're talking about expectations in discrete mathematics, it's really just looking at, okay, what's the expected, what's the probability of this thing here happening times how much is it worth? What's the probability of that happening times how much it's worth? And then we add all that stuff up, and that's like our expected value. Like we've probably done this many times. But in continuous math, you kind of do the same thing. Instead of a sum, you're looking at the integral because you're looking at a continuous distribution. And it's like x times whatever probability there is at that particular point. So it's just the expectation here again. Anyway, So for the uniform distribution, so I'm now going to just assume that instead of people being like really strategic and thinking about the apple, they're really just going to pick some random number for what they really treasure that apple as. Just for simplicity, I'm going to say that between like, I don't know, 0 and 1 is going to be the value of this apple. It's some fraction of $1 or something, or I don't know, whatever 1 means. Could be $1,000 or something like that. So if I assume that each of the bidders is in fact picking a random value, I can say something about the strategies. So I'm just trying to sort of make it tractable here. So I can keep sort of subdividing this thing here, and it's really just as an area of 1. So the question is, what is the probability that if I take any number from the uniform distribution between 0 and 1, what's the probability that x is going to be greater than that? Like some as a function of x here. Well, let's look at it's called f of x, right? It's the cumulative distribution function. And density here is just again 1 for everything there, because it's like a box that's like 1 times 1. And an expectation is just this quantity over here. Okay? So it's really just a half. If I pick a random point and I keep picking random points in the uniform distribution, I expect it to be around half, right? Somewhere in the middle of the distribution. Kind of makes sense, okay? Good, so let's now look again at auctions. And now I'm looking at these 2 people, and they're buying something, they have values that are uniformly distributed between 0 and 1. Like they essentially, what happens is that they just look at a random number generator and they see like, aha, I'm valuing it at 0.8. And the other guy's like, oh yeah, my value is 0.3. And now they're gonna bid. Now they're in like an auction. They're gonna try to get the item, okay? I'm just kind of making it a little bit simpler here, just looking at a uniform distribution here. So values are here, distributed uniformly on 0, 1, okay? What is the equilibrium? What is the Nash equilibrium in this case here with this incomplete information? Well, it kind of ties in with the question, do we have efficiency here of first pass auctions here? So I'm going to claim that in fact, bidding half of what you truly value the item at is an equilibrium. In fact, you don't want to deviate from that strategy. So again, we're looking at 2 bidders, a uniform distribution, and here's what it looks like here. Well, let's assume that both of them, so we're showing an equilibrium. An equilibrium means that I am playing something and you're playing something, and we're both happy. We're both playing the best response to each other, right? We're doing, like, we have no incentive to try any other strategy because it's just gonna come out worse, okay? So I'm gonna show you that in fact this strategy here of bidding half of what you think the thing is really worth is the best thing both of them should be doing. So to prove it, I'm gonna say, well, let's assume that the other guy, bidder number 2, is bidding half of what he expects the value to really, what it really means to him, okay? And I'm going to show that the best response I can have to that strategy is to do the same, is to bid half of what I expect the value to be, okay? So let's just look here. Well, I have a function now, which is just this b1v, or v1 actually, is equal to v1 over 2. And of course, I mean, I should fif it a little bit so that I'm never bidding above 1, because clearly there's no reason to. But in any case, if I just look at what is my expected utility from this transaction, and why is it expected? It's because we're both picking random numbers for what it's really worth to us. So that's why I have to look at an expectation. It's really, is my bid, B1, going to be higher than the other bid, like the other bid guy here? If it is, how much am I getting? What is my utility from this transaction? Well, it's going to be what I value it at, which is V1, minus however much I bid, which is what I end up paying. Okay? And that's it. Like, I don't get any positive utility from any other thing. Like, if I don't get it, I just get 0. And if you just look at the math now, given that we have a uniform distribution, it's just going to be the probability that, in fact, my bid is greater than the other guy's value over 2, because that's what he's bidding. We assumed that he was. Okay? Times the utility I get from it. So for instance here, if my bid here was 1/3, then if the other guy's value is less than 2/3, then I win. Okay? So this thing here, this step, what am I doing here? I'm just asking myself, if you have a uniform number What is the probability that, well, let's look at, so what's varying here? Really what's varying here is V2. So we're just asking, when is B1 as some constant here greater than some uniform random variable divided by 2? It's equivalent to asking, when is 2 times B1, which is just a constant, greater than some uniform distribution? So I could in fact rewrite this thing as simply like probability that some uniform random variable here is what's it less? Let's see, less than 2 times. Well, we'll call it B1. And this thing here is just a constant. And if I'm asking about this is just a cumulative distribution function, what we're looking at here. And if I ask you, if I pick a random number between 0 and 1, what's the probability it's greater than 0.3? Yeah, probably it's like 0.7, right? You just look at how much area you covered, right? So really it's just this number here, 2b1, right? Because I'm just asking about when is a number between 0 and 1 in cumulate being greater than something, and it's the same as the number itself. Okay, so it's just you see it from the math if you do the math. So what I end up with here is 2b1 times v1 minus b1. And what am I doing, right? I'm trying to find out how much am I getting from having the strategy of bidding half of what I truly mean, given that the other bidder is doing the same, okay? So I need to ask myself, well, really what I'm looking for here, the unknown quantity here is b1. Like what should I be bidding given v1? So we're just going to do what we did in high school, which is to differentiate and try to find when it's equal to 0. We're just trying to optimize a quantity, trying to maximize. We're differentiating here with respect to b1, so we're trying to find the highest value of this curve. If we plot the curve, we would see it. And so we get this thing, we differentiate it, we get 2v1 minus this, and it just gives us, if we manipulate it, you like cancel with the 2's, and you move it over, and you see that b1 is going to be equal to v1 divided by 2. So you just get that. The best thing you should be doing is halving your true value and bidding that. So what and then I can do the same thing, switching the roles of bidder 1 and 2, and I'd be done. In other words, what we just showed here was that in this type of auction where we're doing the first price, when you're just writing down a sheet of paper, putting it in, and the person pays the highest price, and there's only 2 people bidding, then really you should just be halving what you truly mean to say. Both of you should be doing that. That's the best thing you should be doing, in fact. It's kind of interesting that this is true, right? And when we add more players, it becomes your true number divided by the number of players, which is kind of cool. So here's the generalized version. Okay, it's almost true what I said. It's n minus 1 divided by n times v1. So yeah, we proved that for a uniform distribution, this is the best thing to do. And for n players, in general, even for other distributions, the best thing you can do for bidding is in fact n minus 1 over n times your true value. So the more players you have, the closer you get to bidding your true value in this type of auction. You're still always lying. You're always kind of underbidding a little bit, right? So so we can kind of sort of we can sort of conclude here that first price auctions are efficient, but they're not truthful because if you look at the equilibrium where everybody's bidding and they're doing kind of they're halving their bids, it's the guy with the highest bid that wins, right? So if we now look at okay, so general distributions, I already said this. It turns out that we also get efficiency like that. Okay, so going back to where we were, we've already proved that lowering the price, raising the price, English auctions, and writing stuff down and taking the second highest price, the second price auctions, are equivalent. Best thing to do is to tell the truth, and that this is efficient in equilibrium. And we showed that first price in Dutch auctions, like the ones where you keep decreasing the price, or where you write down like a sheet of paper and the highest bid is the one that gets paid. that's also equivalent. It's not truthful because you're always lying. In fact, you're lying, like if there's two players, you lie by a factor of 2, like you half your bid. But it is in fact efficient, meaning that like the guy with the highest value is the one that actually ends up getting the good. Because everybody's halving their values, so the guy with the highest value still gets it, right? Cool. Okay, so just the one more thing before we quit today. It's actually interesting to think about now, how well is the seller doing here, right? So what ended up happening is that if you look at the first price auction, like if you look at first price auction, then everybody's kind of lying a little bit, right? They're always underbidding by a little bit, okay? And if you look at the other auction, then they're like, I essentially, somebody said $1 million and the next highest bid was like, I don't know, $9. And I give it to you at $9 instead of the $1 million that you wrote, right? So I as a seller am not getting less than maybe what I could have got, right? So in both cases, the seller is kind of getting a little bit sort of less than what he could have, right? And the question is one type of auction, you know that there are not really two that we're dealing with because two of them are equivalent to one another. Is one better than the other for the seller in terms of profit? What do you think? Is it better to have an auction where you decrease the price in order just to get a higher profit, or the one where you increase the price gradually? Or equivalently, if I have a sealed bid type of thing, is it better to make the person who has the highest price pay that price, and everybody knows that this is how it is, or to look at the second price type of thing? I'm sorry? Mm-hmm. Why would the English auctions be the best, the second price? Why is that better? Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So what's being pointed out is that they're all efficient, these auctions, and that second price and first price and English auctions are truthful, whereas the other ones are not. But instead, so they're truthful, but I as a seller am deliberately, by using those auctions, getting a lower price because I'm giving it the second highest price, right? So I'm kind of, in the auction format, I'm kind of taking a discount, right? So, but conversely, the Dutch auction, or the first price auction, you're getting everybody sort of to lie, and they're all sort of discounting what they're bidding, but I'm still getting the largest bid. Turns out that both of these things are equivalent. It's kind of interesting that there's equivalent. If you just look at here, let's take first price auctions and Dutch auctions here. So what you're going to be doing, what we just talked about before, is that you're going to be reducing your bid by a factor of n-1 over n, right? Or like 1/2 if there was two players, right? You remember this? And if you look at all the different bids, if you look at, let's say just the uniform distribution again, if you just look at what do I expect the largest bid to be, if I just take a random number type of thing, it's going to be somewhere around n over n plus 1 of the true value, right? If you multiply this together, you get n-1 over n plus 1, okay? Now let's look at the different auction here, the second price English auction, where we're looking at the Vickrey thing and so forth. So now I'm committing to collecting less than the maximum bid. I'm taking, in fact, the second highest bid. So if you look at the highest and the second highest bids, then again, if you just look at the order statistics, this is how you mathematically look at what you expect it to be. It's going to be, it's going to be a multiple of two things that cancel out, and you're going to end up with n minus 1 over n plus 1. So in fact, what you expect as a seller is independent of the revenue or of the auction format that you do. This is why you see both types of auctions, or all 4 types of auctions, still being used. It's because you in fact expect the same thing to happen. It's kind of interesting that this would be true. And this principle holds more generally. There's like a huge study and like this, there are books about auctions that talk about what classes of auctions have this property that they all get the same revenue for the seller, and then also like which ones are efficient, which ones are truthful, all sorts of stuff, right? So if you look at this number here, what's striking about it when n grows big? If there's lots and lots of people participating, what does it converge to? Like, are we expecting this to be bigger and bigger in terms of revenue, or smaller and smaller? Is it the same? Like, what is it converging to as n grows here? Well, yeah, I mean, if you just look at this function here, it's kind of, and then there's time like some, I don't know, some value or something like that. Let's say this is constant. So we're just looking at, are we getting, like, let's say that this thing here, like this n minus 1 over n plus 1 would be like, I don't know, going down to, I don't know, 0. It means that we're getting less and less revenue, right? That would be bad. Or if it were to grow really high, then it would mean that as I have more people taking part, I'm getting like super profits from having an auction. But we're getting actually neither of these. In fact, these are almost the same number if you look at it. Like if n minus 1 or n plus 1, let's take like 8 over 10, or then, I don't know, 9 over 11, and 10 over 12. Like as we keep going, if you look at like 1,000,001 over like 1,000,003, it's almost going to be the same number. In fact, it's going to get closer and closer to 1. It's converging to 1. And what that means is that in expectation, or like as n grows big in the limit, the revenue is going to be pretty much what you expected the value to be, like the true value to be. So it's kind of good to have more people, right? Whereas for when there's only 2 bidders type of thing, you expect to get about half, but then it rapidly converges with more participants to getting the ideal revenue, right? It's kind of cool. So really, just to look at the assumptions that we made, this is the last slide here. I mean, we're discussing auction, and we kind of made a lot of simplifications on the way. And a lot of these simplifications, because it's an active field, need to be discussed because we're dealing with real auctions, especially in search markets and so forth, right? So one of them is like, do I really know my value? Do I know I want to pay $8.33 for an apple? Probably just want the apple, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? And then there's also the kind of herding behavior, right? If there's so many people that are willing to pay more than $100 for this book or something like that, maybe it's worth it, right? You kind of want to take part, right? And one way to discover like what the true value is, type of thing, if you don't really know it, is to sort of you take part in this kind of English auction or something like that. There's another assumption that we made, is that this is really just like a one-off auction type of thing. It's not repeated, and there's not like maybe multiple items for sale, or you could take part later, and you could, if you knew the values of everybody else, probably your strategy would be very different. But here you don't. You have to reason about it, and you have to sort of spit out your truthful value simply because you want the item, and you don't want somebody else to snatch it from you. There's issues with budget and wealth effects. Like, I really, really want this TV. Like, it's worth $1,000 for me because I can watch some amazing game or something like that, right? But it's gonna really suck like my life out of me because my wife is gonna divorce me for it if I spend so much money on a TV. So really, I'm only gonna pay 100, right? So it's like there's like a budget constraint that comes into it, right? It's not the case that for anything that you could have bidders that are willing to simply go out of the way and always bid their truthful value, right? Because they simply may not be able to, right? So, and then there's manipulation, like online. It's amazing how much manipulation happens in search markets and all this stuff. And there's huge teams at Google and Yahoo that are just trying to weed out spammers from advertising and all this stuff. Or even just the link structure, like all these spam pages and viruses and stuff. And then it turns out that you can have collusion. You can have these people that are sort of driving up the price, just like, I want to bid that, I want to bid that, I want to bid that. It's all the same person that's going to driving people sort of up the wall. Or you could bid under a false name, and then you're not going to honor the obligations of the auction and so forth, right? Do I know the accurate probabilities of what's going to happen? No, I'm just reasoning. I don't have a good belief of. I don't have any sort of really well-grounded belief in what anyone else is going to do. And then the sort of standard game theory question, which is, are people actually behaving rationally? Is it the case that I am simply an entity that's modeling the world as kind of a utility, and I just want to maximize my utility no matter what? I can always pick the optimal strategy for me. I can do it instantaneously, and I can and that's really factors in everything I want. Everything that's not always true, and there's lots of people that have simply different outcomes. Maybe somebody wants to participate just because he's bored, right? Doesn't really care, right? There's all sorts of differences, like when people are not just behaving sort of selflessly and trying to optimize something. And this is sort of where I think economics has the biggest problem, is that they don't really know how to deal with irrationality because we don't understand it fully. And so a lot of stuff that goes wrong in the world is in fact because we don't understand utility to a significant extent. So that's it for today. So any questions? Yes, network traffic from yesterday. Yes. Right. Like X or X over 10 or something. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So the question is from the traffic game yesterday, where we're looking at two parallel roads going from S to T, like two sort of vertices. Let's say somebody's going from home and he's going to work, and there are two different ways in which he can go. One way always takes an hour, no matter how many people are driving it, and the other one just depends on how congested the road is. So it's equal to, I don't know, X or X over 10 or something like that. The question is there a stable equilibrium that, or how can we reason about an equilibrium here? And I mean, you can kind of like plug in values and see if it's an equilibrium, right? If everybody takes the 1 hour road, then they would be kind of jealous of the lowly congested road, right? So there'll be some people switching there, and at some point the congested road is going to be full. It's going to be at least 1 hour. Let's say it's more than 1 hour. Then those people want to change back to the 1 hour. So probably what's going to happen is that there's going to be enough people that take the X road until it in fact takes 1 hour, and then everybody else takes the 1 hour road. And now nobody wants to change, right? But if there's fewer than, I don't know, X equals to 1 people, if the fraction that we're talking about is somehow lower, then you might in fact have different quantities on both of the roads. And that was kind of the point of the exercise. Yeah, it might be in fact, but really we're not really so concerned with those dynamics. I mean, we did it in the proof just to do the best response one player at a time, but we're just asking, after all that is done, we're at like an equilibrium, and we're asking everybody, are you happy? Do you want to change? And if it's the case that nobody wants to change, we're at an equilibrium, right? But of course, in reality, you don't really know what the other value is. So you may in fact have people trying different roads, or people that are kind of just don't care and they just drive the same way every day or something like that. You may have lots of weird stuff happening in real life, but in the model, we're asking just everybody who is fully aware of after the game is played and everybody picked a route, and we now look at how people were doing. They can now look at it and say, hey, I met this other person at work, and his route was much faster than mine. I'm going to take that one next time. And we're just asking, when is everybody kind of not unhappy about their outcome? So any other questions, maybe about auctions? I guess not. Okay, so thanks for today. I'll turn this off. Stop.